Reinhard Heydrich died in June 1942, but the shadow he cast did not. His widow, Lena, and their children remained tied to one of the most feared figures of the Third Reich long after the war was over. When Germany collapsed in 1945, they lost their estate, their protection, and their place in Hitler's world. What followed were years of interrogations, legal battles, and a life lived under a name many wished to forget. Reinhard Heydrich met Lena von Osten in late 1930 at a rowing club event in Kiel. The connection was immediate. Early 1931 brought a turning point. Heydrich faced a naval inquiry for becoming engaged to Lena while still committed to another woman. Admiral Erich Raeder dismissed him from the Navy that April, bringing his career to an abrupt end. The dismissal pushed him toward a new path. Encouraged by Lena's political beliefs and her early ties to the movement, he joined the Nazi Party and a couple of weeks later the SS, an organization where his ambition and discipline were quickly noticed. Their marriage in December 1931 marked the beginning of the partnership that would shape both his rise and the fate of the family he left behind. In May 1942, Heydrich was serving as acting Reichsprotector of Bohemia and Moravia, overseeing harsh security measures in Prague. On June 27, 1942, Czech resistance agents trained in Britain attacked his open-top car while he was traveling to his office. Heydrich survived the initial blast, but developed a severe infection after surgery. Despite efforts to stabilize him, his condition deteriorated rapidly. He died on June 4, 1942, in Prague. His death led to large-scale reprisals ordered by Nazi authorities and marked the beginning of profound changes for his family. For Lena and the children, the impact was immediate. His death left his widow, Lena, with 4 children: Klaus, Heider, Silke, and Marta. In the months that followed, Hitler kept his promise to support the family. He confirmed their right to the estate at Jungfern-Breschaun, located in occupied Czechoslovakia. The property symbolized Heydrich's status in the SS hierarchy and remained the center of family life for the rest of the war. Life at the estate continued with a sense of privilege and isolation. Lena hosted events for SS families and maintained social ties within the Nazi elite. She remained loyal to her husband's memory and upheld the ideological world he had helped build. The final months of the war brought rapid changes. With Soviet forces approaching Prague, Lena and her children fled west toward Bavaria. They crossed into what soon became the American occupation zone, joining thousands of other German refugees who had lost their homes. By the end of 1945, Lena and the children had settled temporarily in Aschau im Chiemgau, Bavaria. Their circumstances were far removed from the status they once held. They relied on small stipends, support from extended family, and temporary housing arranged by local authorities. The loss of property, income, and political protection marked the start of a new phase in their lives, one defined by investigations, denazification hearings, and a struggle to rebuild an identity in post-war Germany. In the aftermath of the war, denazification became the central process shaping Lena's life. From 1946 onward, she faced a series of hearings in Bavaria designed to determine her political responsibility and eligibility for public benefits. The tribunals examined her early support for National Socialism, her marriage to a senior SS official, and the material advantages she had received during the Third Reich. Lena had joined the Nazi Party in 1931, well before Hitler's rise to power. She later described this as an act of idealism, claiming she had been swept up by enthusiasm for national renewal. Investigators noted that her early membership suggested conviction, not coercion. They also emphasized her close involvement in elite SS social circles, which gave her access to political networks and influence. Lena rejected this interpretation, repeatedly insisting she had played no part in her husband's work. By 1949, Lena had been classified as a Mitläuferin, a follower, rather than an active supporter. This status allowed her to avoid major penalties. She still faced financial hardship, having lost the family estate in Czechoslovakia and possessing no formal occupation. Throughout the late 1940s, Lena sought recognition as the widow of a German officer, which would entitle her to a pension under German law. Her case hinged on a technical question: was Reinhard Heydrich, despite his SS rank, still considered a member of the German military at the time of his death? In 1954, a Munich court delivered a controversial decision. The judges ruled that Heydrich, as the chief of the Reich Security Main Office, RSHA, had still held a qualifying status under military service regulations. This meant that Lena was entitled to a widow's pension. The ruling sparked public debate. Critics argued that a man widely known as one of the regime's most powerful and feared security officials should not be treated as a fallen soldier. Supporters of the ruling emphasized the narrow legal criteria involved, not moral judgment. The ruling became a touchstone in broader discussions about post-war justice and memory. Some scholars question whether Lena's testimony, which portrayed her as a politically passive wife, influenced the outcome more than it should have. Others argue the courts were bound by legislative definitions that made no room for moral considerations. Either way, the pension provided Lena with financial stability at a time when many former Nazi families were struggling to rebuild their lives. By the early 1950s, Lena Heydrich had completed the formal stages of denazification. She was legally permitted to work, travel, and receive state support. With her pension secured after the 1954 Munich ruling, she began rebuilding her life in a new direction. The family eventually settled on the island of Fehmarn off the northern coast of West Germany. There, Lena opened a guest house called the Pension Imbria, which became both her livelihood and a hub for her social network. Running the pension brought Lena into contact with tourists, locals, and former acquaintances from her pre-1945 life. Several reports note that she maintained ties with families connected to the SS elite. Her loyalty to her husband and to the worldview they shared remained unmistakable. She often portrayed herself as a misunderstood victim of the post-war climate. In interviews, she emphasized the hardships she faced as a widow and mother, while downplaying or dismissing the broader consequences of the regime her husband served. In 1976, Lena published her memoir, Life with a War Criminal. The book drew immediate attention. Critics argued that it presented an incomplete and selective account of Reinhard Heydrich's role in the RSHA. They noted that Lena shifted blame away from her husband, questioned historical evidence, and emphasized his private qualities rather than his public actions. Historians still debate whether the memoir reflects genuine conviction, strategic self-presentation, or a mix of both. Public interest in Lena resurfaced in the 1970s and 1980s when journalists and researchers traveled to Fehmarn to interview her. One account, later cited in crime reads, feature an interview with the hangman's wife and based on journalist Nancy Doherty's recorded conversations with Lena, described her firm defense of Reinhard Heydrich and her belief that history had judged him unfairly. According to Doherty's interviews, Lena spoke with sharp recall and unwavering conviction, recounting details of her husband's life with precision. Observers noted that she showed little willingness to reinterpret the past, presenting a portrait of a woman whose beliefs remained unchanged. The debates surrounding her public statements touched on a broader question: how should post-war societies handle the testimonies of individuals who remained loyal to discredited regimes? Some scholars argue that Lena's interviews provide insight into the mindset of families associated with the SS. Others caution that her accounts must be treated carefully, as they often challenge established historical research. The truth varies depending on whether you prioritize archival documents, personal testimony, or scholarly interpretation. By the early 1980s, Lena's health had begun to decline, though she remained active in her guest house as long as possible. Her final years on Fehmarn were relatively quiet, marked by visits from friends and occasional discussions with researchers. She died on August 14, 1985, at age 73. Her legacy remains controversial. To some, she symbolizes the persistence of loyalty among families tied to Nazi leadership. To others, she represents the complexities of post-war identity and the challenges Germany faced in reconciling personal narratives with historical responsibility. The post-war years reshaped the lives of the Heydrich children in ways none of them could have anticipated. Their father's reputation, their mother's loyalty, and the loss of their estate placed them in a difficult position in a society reckoning with its past. Each child followed a different path, shaped by personal choices and the weight of their surname. The eldest son, Klaus, did not live to see the end of the war. Tragedy struck the family in October 1943. Klaus died in a traffic accident near the estate when he collided with a delivery truck while riding his bicycle. His death was a devastating blow to Lena, who mentioned it repeatedly in later interviews. Hitler sent condolences and SS figures attended the funeral. Heydrich became the most publicly known of the surviving children. After the family fled to Bavaria in 1945, he completed his schooling in the region and later pursued a career as an engineer. For decades, Heydrich avoided public attention and declined interviews, choosing to keep his distance from discussions about his father's role in the war. In 2009, he made a rare exception and agreed to speak with John Martin, the author of The Mirror Caught the Sun, Operation Anthropoid 1942. In that conversation, he adopted a notably defensive stance toward his father. In 2011, Heydrich briefly returned to public attention when he offered to support the restoration of the former family residence at Panenska Brzezany in Czechoslovakia. The proposal drew strong reactions in the Czech Republic, where the property remains closely associated with his father's wartime administration. Local officials noted that Heydrich had left the estate as a child in 1945 and viewed his offer as an attempt to help preserve a historic site. Public response, however, reflected a wider discomfort